Whose word is very near. There are some Sundays after the gospel where you wish you could walk out with those guys. I feel like I just want to say good luck, everyone. You heard those. So I want to tell you one story about myself, and then I wanted to talk about what we are to do in this time. So I just got back from a trip to India that was kind of long, a little bit longer than I had completely got my head around. So I think I'm still probably a little jet-lagged, a little bit nervous about leaving the text back there. So you're warned, and if at some point Bill comes to take me away, it's because I've gone too long. Let me tell you one story about that trip. I knew I was supposed to go there as a priest. I'm 44. I was ordained when I was 27. I've been a priest for a little while, but I've never gone to Kerala as a priest. And what I mean by that is I've never dressed like one, just never chosen to do it. Intentionally, my grandmother, an Orthodox woman, a very Orthodox traditional woman, would ask me to come visit her and wear my kupayam, my white robe, as a priest. And even for my grandmother, I couldn't make myself do it. I couldn't figure out how to do it. Do I go to her house and put it on? How do I sneak into it? People see me in the taxi. Because women are ordained in Central Kerala. And women from Central Kerala, people like me that look like we're from there, are not ordained. Outsiders are, foreigners are, and that's great. No judgment on that, no opinion. But we're not. And I really want to be one of the people from that place, right? I want to be someone acceptable and reasonable for them, someone that could be understood. So I just didn't do it. And I love my grandmother. I love my grandmother in the way that you love your perfect grandmother. I sat with her while she died, like we all did. She was pretty perfect in the world of grandmother figures. But I never did it. I once even took a whole chasuble all the way to India and put it on in her house. And she said, because she's awesome, that's not what I meant. I want to see the thing you wear on the street, basically. I didn't bring it. So this trip, Trinity Church has forced me to go and get one of those and wear it in Central Kerala. So I've been worrying about it for months, as one does. And we got there, and all kinds of things were topsy-turvy. So I took the alb I wear here, the white cassock alb that we wear here in the altar in service, and I wore it. And it was terrifying. And I watched for who didn't like it. I did not watch for who found it encouraging or interesting. I kind of dismissed that. I have to say, I watched for who was angry. And it was terrifying. I haven't been scared like that in a long time. And I have to say, there's not a lot that scares me in life. And most of what scares me, my inclination is to run right towards it, that there's somewhere I need to learn and grow. But this is the one place where that is not true, geographically, personally, in my family. So there I was walking around in it, and I got distracted at some point because the bishop of Nandyal was there, and she's a bishop, and she's a she, and she's not from my place, she's from another part of Kerala, in South India, but there she was, walking around in hers too, and I couldn't think, I didn't know what she thought, but it was such a powerful thing for me to stop noticing myself and how terrified I was, and I continued to be terrified, and watch this woman modeling for me what I did not know how to see in myself enough to offer to anyone else. So I say that in light of these readings to say, these are deeply personal. This is about how we choose to live, which is what most of our religious life is about. But these are also about the collective enterprise of being a people, a nation, a religious community, a people. So in the readings from Deuteronomy, what you're hearing is Moses explaining the covenant to the people. This is the covenant that God will make with the people as they go into the land of their ancestors. The whole point of the journey of 40 years, freedom from slavery in Egypt, was to go to this land. They're about to do it. It's not clear they've ever asked for this kind of enormous freedom and responsibility. They don't say, let us go back to where we're from. They don't actually ever do that. They are freed. This is God's agenda for them. And as we read in the Pentateuch, it's a tough one. It's not one they're always on board with. It is extremely difficult. And Moses, sort of smug Moses in this part of Deuteronomy, says, oh, look, it's been 40 years. You still have sandals on your feet. You were fed. God has cared for you. It's one of those moments where you know if there could have been a response from the congregation, they would have said, oh, but this has been impossible. And what's coming is so difficult. And there were gardens in Egypt, and there was meat sometimes. And instead of saying yes and comforting them, the covenant is when you go into the land of your ancestors, and there will be people there When you go to that place, Moses says, I will not be with you, and you must follow the commandments of your God. Obey and live in peace, and you will be a blessing. You will be blessed. It's actually terrifying. And right before the reading we have, it says, and when you think that God is far from you, far, far beyond that water and you cannot get to it, up in the heavens and you cannot ascend to it, remember that God is very near, close at hand, right here. And it's specifically the Word of God. So like a breath in your ear, God is right here. And then sort of good luck, right? And so if you were reading this text through and you're in that part of Deuteronomy, you should be able to say, and it all worked out fine. You could close the book right then, happily ever after. God's real clear about what should happen. Moses communicates extremely clearly. But if I had a Bible to wag at you, you'd know we're in the first quarter maybe or less. Clearly, it doesn't work out so simply, though it's very clear what the covenant is. Very, very clear. You saw the Ten Commandments just a little bit before, and there is such detail in the law of how to conduct oneself in religious worship and how we approach God. It's remarkably detailed. The refugee, the foreigner, the widow, there it is. No confusion. And yet. And if you can imagine that you are the community of Matthew, and if someone were to read to you that passage from Deuteronomy, I think the right response would be to tear your clothes and fall to the floor. What have we done? That we are in this time under occupation. Remember, they were always under Roman occupation, empire, right? They are brutally subjugated. There is death around them at all times. What have we done that we do not have the blessing of God with us? Clearly, we do not. How can we be a blessing in this place? And Jesus today talks also about what it means to be a people. So this is Matthew 5. We've been hearing the readings from Matthew 5 for a couple of weeks. The Beatitudes, the Salt reading. It's almost like another version of the law. It sounds just like it, is framed just like it. This is what it means in this time to follow and be faithful. And we know the Beatitudes. Blessed are you. It's interesting, right? Blessed, which is exactly the same language in Deuteronomy. If you do these things, you will be a blessing. You will be blessed. You will be happy. And today what we get to is, you know the law. They start to lay out that Ten Commandments law, Jesus does. And you can just imagine yourself there. You've heard the Beatitudes. What do we do with that? It's really new information, right? What is salt that's not salty? That's not a thing. That's hard to take in. It goes on and on. And now he says, you have heard, do not murder, which is what they must have been thinking. We know the law. We follow it. Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't all good people? And then they go to this place that's tough. Jesus takes us to a really tough place. So you haven't murdered, but are you angry? It's interesting because you know Jesus gets angry in the Gospels. So let's not worry too much about it. Just hear it. Jesus gets really angry. And then adultery, and these goes on, and we know now, and maybe they knew then, sort of human wiring is you're going to have some lustful thoughts. I can guarantee it. If you're not having them right now in the place that you're sitting, you're going to have some today. You might have already had some. I knew Mark would be here today. This is not an indictment of things that come from outside of you, and this is not an indictment of who you are. I think actually this is Jesus talking about what it might mean for us also to define ourselves as a community. And I think a place that it takes us that is profound and important for this particular moment in our time, which is so cynical, and I am cynical in it as well, is that we are not allowed to be self-righteous. None of us. And we're right about a lot of things. I know you are, I am. But we are not allowed. We are taught that we are not allowed to be self-righteous. Now, there's a lot to mock out in the world around us, and I am as guilty as anyone, and I enjoy it, frankly. I'm not repentant for it yet. I have not been convicted in that way by God. But self-righteous is different, right? It is saying, we have followed the law. We have heard it, you have heard it said, we have heard it said. We have followed the law. We've done everything right, and yet God does not seem to be on our side. The law doesn't work. God does not work. Could it be that there is something more for us to do? And every time I think we could step back and say, you have heard it said. Right? You have heard it said. You have heard it said, for example, that all men are created equal. And that means everyone, not just the men. And we've seen how that's worked out for us as a nation, right? So maybe we need to hear it said somewhat differently in this time. Maybe there's some work to do in this time and in this moment that shifts what we have heard said. We knew what it meant. We know how it was explained. How's that worked out for us? And I think Jesus is doing something very similar to the commandments. We've said, here are the things. Here's a small list. How's that working out for us today? And then the blame in Jesus' narrative does not go to God. It comes right back to us for responsibility, that we, like the people of Israel, the Hebrew people that have suffered and have a common story of suffering, come to this new place and have a responsibility. They didn't ask for it, but it was theirs. And I think we find ourselves in a place like that. Across your political beliefs or where you come from, who you are, we are in a moment like that. I think it's undeniable in this nation, where we are responsible, and we have to be responsible for who we become. So the formula is pretty quick. It's like shampooing your hair, right? It's resist, right? Persist, and unfortunately, repeat. And you all know it because you've all done it your whole lives. And it is something about our public narrative when we believe that that is defeat, that we're back in a place where we've been before, that is defeat. It's not defeat. That is the functioning of human people trying to figure out how to be a community together. And our text is full of human people trying to figure it out. What would God want from us in this time if we were to get this right? So you have today, we heard earlier in the week, most of us in media, the letter of Coretta Scott King from the 60s, right after the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act. So the act had been passed. In the way we are taught our history, you would think it was all golden after that, right? We hit it. We passed that law. That was tough. Interestingly, years after that, he's having to write a letter to say the Voting Rights Act, which just guarantees the franchise, the right to vote, access to the vote, is threatened again and cannot be, and definitely cannot be by a judge. So there's this beautiful letter that was read in our Senate that says it cannot be. It's not possible. Will not be. It is wrong. It is unjust. Amazing, right, to read that from the 60s in 2017 and have it be almost an explanation of what just happened and what's been happening for a couple of years in this country as we have eroded the Voting Rights Act. It's the repeat part of the persist. And the resist is to not ever, ever undersell our democracy and our people and our notion of who we can be. To those who will always resist the powers that be, they will always be there. If we remember, if you want a benign image of a power that is, there is Washington, the largest and wealthiest landowner of his time, Mr. Washington, when he becomes the president of this country, because he didn't want to pay his taxes, essentially, right? That's our wonderful story of liberation as a nation, a slave owner. So don't worry. This is deep in our bones, the work that we have to do, and it makes sense that we default to places of sloth and a lack of critical thinking, and we feel defeated. It makes sense. But we are here to resist and to persist and to repeat, and this text gives us so many tools for it. And the reason I think that we spiral into really particular personal behavior today, that Jesus himself does in the text, right? Don't forget that. It's not that you are not good enough if you can't get to that point. And it's not that you are good enough if you don't break the big ones. It's that we are all not good enough, and we are all the beloved children of God. And we all lead in love and insist that we will love one another. And we will not let anyone in power, in office, or in our churches, or on our streets, whoever it is that riles up the hate inherent in us, we will not let anyone say for us for any length of time that we will not do that. And I won't say we will resist at all times because we fail at it. It just means we need to get reorganized and learn how to resist again and persist again. And if you think I'm being political, as you know, I really love to be political, and I feel like Mr. Trump has given me a new permission in reminding all of us of the Johnson Amendment. I'm from Texas, and proudly, and LBJ is a proud son of Texas. And I knew this, but I'd forgotten it in my entire life in the church. I haven't thought about this as an adult, that the Johnson Amendment is from the 50s. 501c3 status is from the late 40s, early 50s, right? Didn't exist before. 501c3 status, our tax status, is why we can't support a particular candidate. in an election as a church. It's from the 50s, right? Not from 1750, from 1950. So those of us that are raised with, and we almost all of us are, that the church is not political. We can choose to make the church not political, and there are many reasons to do that. But let's be really clear, this is about a recent issue with our tax status that has made many of us very, very tentative about getting into what might seem like legislative or political issues in our time. The broadest sense of political is the people, how the people live in community, who we decide to be. And this is what the Gospels talk about today, and it's what is being said in Deuteronomy. It's an enormous responsibility to figure out how to love one another. It's enormous. It is not simply done, and it is not simply about being kind to one another, though I wish we could do that too. It's important. Our personal behavior is important. It is about how we order our society, and that is political. That happens legislatively, right? There's no other way to do it. We are no longer a family following Abraham. We are not just taking care of our own cattle and our herds. We are a nation of enormous diversity trying to figure out how to be faithful followers of God. And the text today says that when it works, this is in Corinthians, right? When the grace comes and we are greater than ourselves, we can give glory to God because we could not have managed that. But those steps toward it, every little piece is ours. And we have a heritage that outlines it for us. We know what it is. We have the words of Pauli Murray and Audre Lorde and James Baldwin, and as we've heard, he's back, Frederick Douglass, telling us so creatively in times of enormous struggle who we could be, that people have always migrated. It is the nature of human beings, poetically and beautifully and powerfully, under the most oppression that we could imagine, who we could be. We have no excuse as a church in this time to not cast the same vision. So resist and persist and repeat.